10 years ago, owning a property quietly was pretty easy. You bought a house, you recorded a deed, and then you moved on with your life. And really, not many people cared. Nobody even noticed it. But that world is now gone. The recent 1.5 billion record data breach didn't just leak passwords, it collapsed the wall between public records and private profiles. Your name, your relatives, your addresses, your LLCs, your properties are all stitched together in this single searchable identity. And this matters because lawsuits no longer start with accidents. They start with visibility. If your name is on a deed, okay, you're not just an owner, you're a data point. And that data point is what gets searched and that's what gets sold. So as an investor who owns real estate myself, I want to make sure that I quietly own property because people who don't own property in their own name or are hidden from the public record typically tend to get sued less and they tend to be safer. Okay, why is that? It's because they're harder to find. Quiet ownership used to be accidental. Now it has to be intentional. All right, so here's the issue. Most investors think that risk comes from your tenants, guests, or contractors. Hey, that's outdated thinking in my world because today the real exposure happens before anything goes wrong. A plaintiff attorney doesn't wait for an incident and then ask who owns the property. They start with the opposite question. Who is this person we're going after? Are they worth suing? So the search begins with a name, right? Somebody comes into their office and they say, I've been injured. All right, let's find out who owns that property. Because once your name is entered, everything starts fanning out from there. All your property, all your equity. There's insurance assumptions that get made, entity connections. Hey, there's no court filing now, no discovery, no lawsuit yet. The fact of the matter is this is just pre-qualifications, right? If your name is easy to connect to your real estate, then you've already failed the first layer of defense and you don't even know this was a test that you failed. That's the thing that's amazing. People come into my office and they meet with me and they say, why is he targeting me? Why is this attorney going after me? And I'm able to pull up on a public database and say, here's the reason why. Look at all of these assets in your name. That is why they're using terms such as prejudgment writ of attachment, all right? Or they're going to file a lis pendens. Those are things that you never want to see in a demand letter from an attorney, because that means they know you have assets and they're about to tie them up. So do not ignore this. Do not become a target. What you want to do is get your name off a title. Now, the mistake that a lot of people make is they think, all right, well, I'll just set up an LLC. Listen, LLCs are great if you set them up the right way. But many times people get it wrong. They hear protect yourself and they immediately think, I'm going to set up a limited liability company. But if you're not setting the LLC up the right way, that's just crazy. It's just incomplete because an LLC may limit your liability exposure, but it doesn't stop the lawsuit. That's what we want to do is we want to make sure that that lawsuit doesn't even want to get started because if somebody does a search, they can't even determine what that LLC owns, right? So there's ways in which we can hold our assets in such a way that you don't become a data point that is searchable. You see, many times when I'm working with someone and they first start down this journey of creating an asset protection plan, I will go out there and I will do a search on them and just see what type of breadcrumbs are laying around. And it's amazing if you go to sites such as DataTree or opencorporates.com, how these little breadcrumbs can turn into their entire plan. It all starts to unravel. So instead of hiding ownership, what most investors are doing is they actually map everything right back to it. And so a simple name search turns into your personal profile, your LLCs, your property portfolio. Listen, that's not asset protection. That's basically a brochure. All right, so the goal is to reduce lawsuits, and you don't start with liability caps. You start with asking yourself this harder question. How do I stop strangers from knowing what I even own at all? And that question will take us beyond limited liability companies. So how do we break this link and why you should be so concerned about this $1.5 billion record breach that just occurred at the end of last year is we need to make sure that your name is not on title. And so the way we do that with property, okay, we're not talking about loopholes here, sophisticated ownership structures. Okay, what I'm talking about is just the basics of what real estate investors who have already figured this out realize how to get their name off of title. And that is by using two entities. The one is a land trust, okay? The second is a holding LLC, and then you want to layer all of this, which is what I call a nominee trustee. Okay, so let's talk now about what a land trust actually does and why you need to get these into your investing here in 2026. Because not only is the anonymity an issue, there's also an issue with the new FinCEN regulations. Be sure to catch my video. It's coming out in a week on that as well, because that's going to be important on this topic. All right, so what is a land trust and what does it do? So think of it this way. A land trust is a title holding vehicle, all right? If it's set up correctly, it can provide numerous benefits for you, all right? But you have to understand the purpose of it and how to get it set up the right way so you can tap into these benefits that come from using this critical tool when it comes to investing. Okay, so let's break this down for you. All right, so let's say we have an investor. His name is Pete. And Pete has set up 3 limited liability companies that own his property, just like this. Now, Pete thinks he's protected, and he is protected from the standpoint of individuals. If they were to sue the LLC, he's protected from that. But the fact of the matter is that all these LLCs point to Pete. So if somebody was running an asset search, let's say there's a creditor out there, and this person, this is his attorney, and he's looking at Pete, the attorney's going to be able to find all 3 of these limited liability companies because Pete set them up. He's tied to them. This is the mistake that a lot of real estate investors make with their planning. They tie themselves to their property and they don't even know that they're doing it. Now, the way you need to break that connection to your real estate is to hold it in an anonymous structure. And that's where that land trust comes in. So if we think of another investor, let's just move Pete off to the side here. Let's say we have Susie. Okay, now Susie, she's figured this out. What Susie's done is she's transferred her properties into land trusts. Okay, so a land trust is a title holding vehicle. If you're not familiar with them, the land trust itself, unlike an LLC, and this is where the benefit comes in. You see, with an LLC, you have to file something with the Secretary of State, and that is searchable. With a land trust, it's a private document. That means nothing gets recorded anywhere. Nothing is filed. So that's already one step above the LLC when it comes to creating a privacy structure for yourself. So what Susie's done is she has set her structure with these land trusts. Now, what she's done with the land trust, let me just give her one more property here. What she's done with the land trust, she had to come up with a name. She can choose any name she wants for her trust. Unlike Pete, who had to go through and make sure the name was available with the Secretary of State, Susie does not have to do this. Okay, what she can do is just figure out a name. So a lot of times people name them after the property itself. So maybe this property was on Olive Street. She might call this the Olive Trust. Okay, and this one over here is the Green Street Trust. All right, so she has these 2 trusts that she's set up. Now, what Susie wanted to do with these trusts is she didn't want her name to appear on title to the property. So when she created the trust, she made a very important decision here. You see, with a land trust, you have to have a trustee. And this is where individual real estate investors who create this tool can also blow the entire benefit of setting it up, which is the anonymity portion, because they name themselves as a trustee. You never want to do this when you're creating a land trust. You always want to use what is referred to as a nominee trustee. Okay, this is the golden ticket to privacy. So with a nominee trustee, you have 2 choices. You either name someone that you trust that preferably is an attorney or somebody with a professional designation that can serve as a buffer between you and a third party. Or if you don't want to do that, you set up an LLC, an anonymous LLC, to be your trustee. Susie opted for the second. She decided to set up a Wyoming limited liability company. So she sets up this Wyoming LLC. And if you watch any of my other videos, you know the benefits of Wyoming. Basically, Wyoming doesn't collect any information on the members or managers. So if you set up an LLC in Wyoming and it's your LLC, in this case, it's Susie's LLC. She's the manager here and she's the member, and no one will be able to discover this. So Susie creates her Wyoming LLC, and we'll call this No One LLC. Now, when she creates her land trust, she needs to appoint a trustee. So she will name No One LLC as the trustee of her trust. That's in the trust document. Now remember, the trust document is a private document. No one can discover this document if they did a record search because it's not recorded anywhere. The only thing that shows up on a public record is title to real estate. Now, this is where it gets interesting, and this is why Susie's in a better position than Pete. Because again, as I stated with Pete, his name is tied to these LLCs, which then ties him to the property. So when someone's looking at Pete individually, they know he has 3 businesses with 3 properties. Okay, or if they look at the properties themselves, they look at the LLC, they see the LLC is owned by Pete, then they see that he owns 2 other LLCs. Now you might be wondering, why would Pete care? Because what attorneys like to do is bring claims that allow them to pierce the veil of the LLC. We had a client last year at the end of 2025 that went through this process where the attorney was trying to pierce the veil of the LLC, and they tried darn hard to do it. Now, thankfully, that client, again, they were using our limited liability company. We set it up for them, and we have very comprehensive documents, and they were unable to break the LLC. In fact, they spent over 4 days in court with the documents being shown to the judge trying to break it, our client told us, and they were not successful. But you have to ask yourself, how strong is the LLC you're using? See, you could get in front of a judge that doesn't respect the entity, doesn't understand, or maybe is a poorly drafted entity, and then you've got some real concerns there. So we want to make sure that, A, you got great docs, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about not even finding yourself in that situation because you don't want to be a Pete. You don't want somebody to look at you and see all these assets. We want to be a Susie because Susie is not tied to her properties when she puts them into a land trust. Because when she takes the property that was in her name and she transferred it into a land trust, she's going to deed it from her name to, it'll go like this. It'll be from Susie to no one LLC trustee of the Olive Trust. Okay? So this is what's on title. And then the other property, no one LLC trustee of the Green Street Trust. And you just keep doing this over and over again. Every time you acquire a property, you transfer it into the trustee of the trust and your name is off there. This is how you defeat someone from finding out what you own. So in this big data leak that I've been referring to, people who had their name associated with entities or with properties directly, that's all out there now. That's for sale. Think about the people that have done this, and if you discover, one person has 6 properties, title theft can become a problem as well. I recently read a Reddit post about someone who's dealing with that right now. They bought property from someone who did not own it. So we want to make this extremely difficult for attorneys or for people that want to steal our assets from us, our real estate from us. And the way we do that is we disassociate ourselves from the ownership of this property. So your personal address isn't tied to it, your name isn't tied to it, nothing ties back to you. So with this type of structure, you have complete control over the assets because Susie, who runs this Wyoming LLC, can direct what's going on with that land trust. Now, I use that term loosely because the thing about land trust is really the trustee, if you set them up the way we do here at Anderson, has very little control. Okay, the only decision-making the trustee has over our land trust is basically they have to pay the property taxes. That's it. Everything else, all of the other decision-making authority rests with the owners of the trust, or what we call the beneficiary. Now, this is what I was referring to earlier when I said you need some entities here, a two-entity stack. What you have to do now with these land trusts is then take your land trust like this, and you're still going to use that structure that Pete was talking about, or you can use this one here. You're going to have the land trust owned by a separate LLC. So in that case, if I was using, what do I call this one here? The Olive Trust. This here is the Olive Trust that holds your property. All right, this is the Olive Trust. Now we're going to have no one LLC sitting over here. This is no one. And the reason I'm putting it up here is because I don't want people to get confused and think that this LLC is the same as this one. They're completely different. Okay, you do not want to mix these two. All this does here, this serves one position, one purpose. It is to be a trustee of your land trust. And that is it. Nothing else. Doesn't even need a bank account for this company. So this is your trustee LLC, and it can be the trustee of all of your land trusts. Now, why did I put this LLC in here? Because for Susie, unless this property is in Florida, she wants to make sure that if something did go wrong with this property, that the liability doesn't pass to her directly. Because see, if she stayed as the beneficiary of the trust and this property burned down and somebody's injured, they're going to sue the trust and then they're going to come after Susie. So I don't want that to happen. And that's why I'm going to quietly slip in this Wyoming LLC, make it the beneficiary of your trust. This is the next step in your asset protection plan. And you do not want to miss this. You have to put an LLC into place to serve as that buffer. So if anything were to go wrong with the property that's held in the trust, then you're not going to be held liable. So what you're getting out of this plan right here is you're obtaining anonymity for all of your real estate. In fact, there's another strategy you can use for your personal residence. It looks very similar to this, but we use not a land trust, but a residence trust. So if there's data breaches out there, people will no longer see you associated with these properties because each trust holds its own property. So you don't look at one trust and think, oh, wow, look at all the properties it owns. It only owns one. So it reduces your risk exposure. That is, people or attorneys, aggressive attorneys, are not going to look at this as a huge payday for them because, frankly, there's not a lot of assets here. It's just one property in a trust. And so you could have 15 trusts, but people aren't going to be able to tie them back to you because you've set up the structure the right way. So if you're an investor or you planning to be an investor, I really want you to get familiar with using this type of planning for your real estate investing. Listen, in 2025, 2024, 23, going back many years, we would use land trusts and LLCs interchangeably. But here in 2026, listen, this year I'm going all in on land trusts for my real estate investing clients because not only is it about the anonymity, that's really becoming more and more important now, but there's also, as I hinted to earlier, the new FinCEN regulations that are going into effect on March 1st. That require property disclosures, that is owner's disclosures, and that includes your entities as well. And so if you don't want to be disclosing information to the federal government, you've got to get familiar with land trusts. In fact, I got a video coming out next week that will discuss this exact topic and what you need to do to be ready for it when it hits on March 1st. Hey guys, if you liked the video, be sure to hit the like button, and I wish you the very best with your investing.